So I'm going to give you the easiest definition. I'm a simple thinker. And so if I had to think of three words, it would be values in action. I think
Mm,
that is what culture is all about. And or when there are no gaps between your values and your behaviors. And so if you can think of it that way, that's a simplified approach. And when I think of culture, I also think a little bit of personal branding, because in personal branding, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room.
This is the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, where we equip and empower leaders like you to thrive in and create harmony between your professional and personal lives. I'm your host, Bethany Reese, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking with Eric Stone about how to jumpstart your workplace culture. Eric D. Stone's passion for business led him to an influential 26-year career at the iconic rental company Enterprise Holdings, where he quickly became one of the most decorated regional vice presidents in the company's history. His ability to connect and motivate employees from all different generations and demographics allowed his teams to sustain top-level results and a culture of pride. Eric attributes much of the success to his ability to create, ignite, and sustain a high-performance culture, one that enabled him to lead his teams through challenges like 9/11, the Great Recession, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Great Resignation, along with an extraordinary ability to adapt to the unexpected and help others do the same. Eric retired from Enterprise in 2018 and founded Clear Path Ventures, which specializes in guiding young professionals and businesses as they navigate their path to success. Welcome to the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, Eric. I'm so excited to have you.
Bethany, thanks for giving me an opportunity to share my message.
Oh man, I am so glad to have you on the podcast because you have great wisdom and experience to share about one of the, I believe, most essential areas that will absolutely bite leaders in the butt if they ignore it or don't cultivate it. And that area, my friends, is workplace culture. You know, Eric, I always like to start a topic of discussion by actually defining the topic so we're all on the same page. And I love what you say about workplace culture in your book, that it's not, I love that you define what it's not. It's not hugs, it's not high fives, and it's anything but soft. I love that so much. So, can you actually define for us what we're talking about today? What is workplace culture?
So I'm going to give you the easiest definition. I'm a simple thinker. And so if I had to think of three words, it would be values in action. I think
Mm,
that is what culture is all about. And or when there are no gaps between your values and your behaviors. And so if you can think of it that way, that's a simplified approach. And when I think of culture, I also think a little bit of personal branding, because in personal branding, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And culture are the behaviors that exist when leadership is not in the room. And so there's a little bit of a parallel with those two.
I love that so much. It's values and behaviors. You know, so often companies can have values, they can have their core values, put them on a piece of paper, but then they're not always lived out. And I love the importance that you're bringing to that of the behaviors is what's lived out daily. And culture is there a gap between what you say you value and what you actually do every day? And so often, organizations do have a gap there and they don't address it. They just keep doing the work, showing up and doing the work. And it really affects their execution. So, can you just give us the why behind the what? Why should we care and pay attention to workplace culture over some of the other things that gets our attention, like our emails and inboxes and meetings?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really a soul searching of being part of a lot of different teams. There were only a few things that really I felt separated our team from others, meaning I was within a very competitive, talented company where everyone really had the same initiatives. The truth is, we had, there's customer service and sales and employee
Mhm.
development and all of those things. But there was something within that allowed teams to execute a little bit better. And as I continued to dig deep on what was that wild card, what is that thing that becomes the catalyst to execution, it was culture. And so
Mm.
that was the thing for me that allowed us to, over a decade of a few of my different leadership opportunities, is to truly make a difference, not only in the performance standpoint, but developing people personally and professionally as well.
I love that. Just to summarize what I heard, and it's just such a great point. Culture is the catalyst to execution. It's so important to just hang your hat on that and just to live that out every day. You cannot have execution. You've been hired to execute something to get results, right? But you can't have it without culture. So this leads me to your book because I absolutely love the title. And honestly, I love the graphic on the book cover. So the book is called Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture. It's a roadmap for igniting high performance. And the graphic is a set of jumper cables. Now, as a person who has driven plenty of bad non-working cars, I have. Yeah, feel free to show the book. I love it.
There's the
It's
jumper cable. Yes.
jumper cables on a cup of coffee. I have experienced plenty times in my life, especially as a teenager and young 20 something, driving those, terrible cars of the car not starting. And it's just like, frustration. I can't go where I want to go because my car doesn't have the energy, the battery that it needs, and it needs that jump start. So can you just dive into us? What created this concept of jump starting the workplace culture?
It was really from my whole corporate upbringing of, as I stated a little earlier, it was what was that difference maker? And I felt that this piece of culture was the thing that was really throttling us and would keep us going, more importantly, during the difficult times. So culture is important all times, but really important during the challenging times. And you mentioned a few things that I happen to go through, and everyone has those big challenges. And this was the thing that allowed us to keep going. Whether there's a recession, there's a pay issue, there's something, the technology is going wrong.
Mm,
This ability to keep things moving forward. And the jump start is kind of that reminder, almost like motivation. Sometimes you need a little bit of that spurt to get you going. You can get in that rut. And so that was really the term of jumpstart of why I felt it was so important. And then, of course, with the title and the design was coffee's a workplace image,
mhm.
jumper cables to get you going, and culture being that difference maker, I thought would be the right fit.
I love it. I love it so much. And you know what I also love is the hope in that. We can sit in our own little pity parties of I don't enjoy my work. I don't enjoy being at work. I have that dread. Ooh, we're coming into 2025 and ugh, that's how I feel, right? Some people have that feeling of dread and it ties back to the culture. And so I love the hope that your book gives of, you know what, you can jumpstart it. Just because your car doesn't have a working battery, you can jumpstart it and then it can continue on. There is hope in that. And so I love throughout the book, you deliver so many stories that help explain how to jumpstart a work culture. And stories is one of the best ways that people can learn and connect emotionally and then also application wise. So, can you give us just a couple of your favorites, one or more if you'd like, stories from your book that teaches us the lesson of how to jumpstart the workplace culture and increase that engagement?
So I can give you a great story about a young man named Johnny the Bagger. And this is going to allow us to envision how you take an initiative and you put it through your entire organization from a new hire all the way to the person who's about to retire to truly live the values that you espouse with behaviors that make a difference. And so Johnny the Bagger was a young man who was a bagger within a grocery store chain. And this grocery store chain was really struggling with creating a great customer experience and creating long-term engagement. And so what they did is they hired a consultant who gave a big speech on each and every one of you can make a difference by creating memories to have your customers come back. And she said, how? By putting your personal signature on every interaction. And so Johnny reflects for a couple of weeks. In the beginning, he didn't know how he could make a difference, but then he came up with an idea. And he would go home every night and he'd write a thought of the day. And on the back of the thought of the day would be a thank you for shopping with us. So fast forward a little bit of time. Store manager's doing their rounds and sees Johnny's line is 3 times as long as anyone's line. And he is triaging, trying to open up new lines until one of the customers taps him on the shoulder and says, that's okay. I'm waiting for Johnny's thought of the day. But it doesn't stop there. Someone all the way in the frozen food section says, I used to shop here once a week. I now come here every time I'm in the area because I want to get Johnny's thought of the day. But it doesn't stop there. About a month later, the store manager calls the consultant and says, "You're not going to believe what's going on in our organization." Now, the floral department walks and takes a broken flower or unused corsage and they walk around the grocery store and they pin it on a young child or an elderly customer. All of a sudden, people are having fun and creating memories, all because Johnny chose to make a difference. Well, I took that story and we were struggling in a particular time of our the season, in our busiest time with customer satisfaction, net promoter, it just was flatlining. And we searched and found this video. And so we took this video and it became part of our new hire orientation, that here is what the behaviors of what we're looking for to create a memorable experience and for you to put your personal signature on that interaction. And so, but we didn't stop there. It then went into every training class. You'd either see it for now the second or third or fourth time as you progress, because it was really important to create these behaviors and memories. But we didn't stop there. We then recognized every week the locations would have a kind of an MVP of customer service, but they would call it the Johnny the Bagger Award. They would
Oh,
then submit their stories all the way up the chain, and we would eventually decide a winner of who was demonstrating the Johnny the Bagger mentality. We would have an event at my house every other month, and those would be some of the winners. But of course, right, we didn't stop there. We then put it into the employee review. So what's really important is it was everyone knew, whether it was in a training class, a recognition platform, in the location, or now in a written review to give feedback of were you demonstrating the Johnny the Bagger values and behaviors. And it matched one of our values, which how important customer experiences and service was to our company. And that's a great example of just pulling something, tucking it into every part of your organization, and it hits a few real key ingredients that we might have a chance to talk to about these key factors of employee engagement that are also unbelievably important, because when you create engagement, that tends to lead to strong business outcomes according to the Gallups of the world.
mm. There is so much depth into everything that you just shared. I wish that we could spend hours just diving into everything. Some of the things that I heard, number one, is whenever, as a company, you had an initiative, you want to increase net promoter score, you want the customers to have a great experience. That sounds very businessy. But the way in which you went about it is, let me tell you a story about a human being who made a difference and took ownership of where he was and how he made everybody's day better. He was still doing his job, doing what he did. He bagged groceries, but it was a completely different experience for the customer. And then you took that and then you embedded it not just at one level of training, but multiple levels. You continue to sustain that message and that conversation of what it meant and how to align to the bigger picture value of how we serve customers and how you have an ownership piece in that. And then thinking of culture, you celebrated it and then you built more culture around it because of those celebrations. And then you added it into, okay, it's an expectation. Let's give feedback on that. Like that is so deep and rich of everything that encompasses culture. I just applaud you so much. And I have to say, thinking about how to use that story, what can our listeners, in everything that you just said, what are some key takeaways for them to take something like Johnny the Bagger and implement it in their own work culture to jumpstart? And I want to start again at kind of base zero. You were struggling with net promoter. The customer experience needed to get better. So you were starting at that place, and so many people can feel that. Ugh, we got to get better. And so, can you walk us through the intentionality again, just like the application of how you increased the engagement in that very intentionally?
Yeah. So the keys were a few. When you come up with an idea, if it's my idea, hey, hopefully people will like it and they trust their leader that they'll want to be part of it. This idea came from what we would call, or we called our think tank. And these were managers who were selected by their peers of the locations to meet with me every other month. And we would go over strategy and things we need to be ready for, opportunities, what's working, what's not, what initiatives are going great, what's not. And their biggest role was really a few things. One, polite disagreement. They can't just say, yes, Eric, you're right, because I'm definitely not.
Oh, I love that.
And their job was to create the agenda. Now, I might
Mhm.
add something that was coming that
Mhm.
I needed their opinion on. And so I used the think tank to say, you know, take what we all agree we're struggling with, go reach out to people, go reach out to our employee base, go try to generate what we think is missing and bring it back. And then, so that was really the genesis of how we started to get ourselves through it. Over my shoulder, something called the hourglass, and it really was the process maybe for this that might be helpful when you think of, how did we do it? And so when you think of what we're struggling, first, an hourglass is an hour, O-U-R, not an eyeglass that we are both wearing. It is bringing everyone together. And so on the top of this hourglass, for those who maybe are in a car driving, you won't see it, but there is a discovery period at the top of your hourglass. And this is the stuff like the think tank. They were gathering information and feedback from stakeholders and clients and employees and all of such. Until we eventually now go into the hourglass where it bows out and we're trying to orchestrate what they're getting, hence the think tank meetings of what do we need to come up with. Now, as it bows, it eventually starts to get very slender in the waist. There's your rollout period,
Mhm.
clarity, the two or three
Oh.
things that we feel we must do to ensure everyone is in sync, aligned, a
Mhm.
popular word. Then it bows back out. This is the reinforcement and training that you saw us do through our training and onboarding and all of those things until eventually the sand hits the bottom. And this is the assessment period. Scores come out, however you are deeming your ability to recognize how we're doing, the sand hits the ground. Two key points that we always had to remember. There are two foundations on the hourglass, as you'll see them. One pillar is mission, vision, values. Are we living those? The other are your policies and your procedures, and those are going to help you as you make your decisions. Now, just when you think you have it, sometimes things go wrong, technology breakthrough, whatever it is, you would turn the hourglass over or restart where you are in the process. And so,
Mhm.
there's a genesis of using the think tank and all the things we discussed even earlier on of how we took that and got it through the organization to get belief, celebrate victories, which is so, so important for your
Oh,
team.
I love that visual, and it makes perfect sense because you're dealing with so much. That's the bigger part of the hourglass. But then what trickles down as initiative is that clarity piece, and it's the skinniest part of that hourglass, and that is just such an amazing visual. I love visuals, and I understand that one, and that your visual gave me clarity
Yeah.
in rolling out initiatives and things like that. But also, transformation is another big buzzword in business. But I love what you were talking about, having that think tank and going out to individual stakeholders and gathering information, not having a room full of higher up executives making decisions and pushing it top down. Transformation actually comes bottom up of, hey, I'm the closest to the work. I can see where the problems are. I can
Yeah.
see where we're lacking and we're struggling. And you were so intentional in gathering all of that and then bringing it together to then have some clarity in where we go from here. And I just applaud you for that. That is such an amazing testimony to how we build workplace culture. Talk to your people.
Yeah. And we called what the think tank in the book becomes is my culture carriers. And so a lot of
Mhm.
people would always ask, well, how do you scale your business and culture? And it was culture carriers. You're getting those who are in, big, potentially good leadership positions that
Yeah.
are important and they spread the message.
I
So,
love that. You know what that makes me think of? I don't know if anybody has ever been to like a candlelight service of any type, but usually one person lights that first candle, right? And it's burning bright. And let's say it's pitch black outside or in the room or wherever you're at. And you have this tiny little light, but then they spread it to somebody else. And then that person spreads it to somebody else. And before you know it, this room is so well lit or outside is so well lit because of those torch bearers, those candle carriers. And I feel like that's kind of the visual I had in my head as you were just talking of how you spread that culture is it's literally relationship by relationship brick that you build that cultural cathedral. And
the,
I
the first factor that I was referencing earlier on was a strong relationship with your manager. And it was so important that trust was built within our organization. And so many people leave, as we all know, because of their immediate dissatisfaction with their manager. And so, under that first factor, we would be very intentional of, well, what does that mean, having a strong relationship? And it should start at the interview process. Okay, so we would define a little bit of that. And then it really needs to go to the onboarding part. And then there really needs to be an initiative that you encourage that establishes a relationship. Ours was called the 30 minutes of quote unquote fame. It was your chance in a one-on-one with your manager to have some time to shine personally and or professionally. And so for each of these factors, when I talk with corporations or fellow board members or whoever it is, it's under each factor. Just make sure you're talking a few initiatives and keep it simple.
Oh, I love that. And as we've been talking about culture, we kind of started off with the whole goal was the customer experience. But I want to point out to all the listeners out there how much you're talking about the employee experience and being very intentional in that. And I've heard you say a couple of times from the hiring process to the onboarding process to the training process. And I even heard you say all the way through retirement. I think so often we can, forget to be intentional all the way through from the first, impression that you make when they come in for an interview all the way until the day that hopefully that legacy employee retires. And so can you talk to us about that, about how to be intentional with the employee experience from day one to the end?
Ours, it was my involvement for me. And so the question is, and depending on your organization, what's your involvement? And it was really important that I know for me personally that I had a small touch to build a relationship early on. And I wanted to learn about these employees. And before we started, we talked about one of the biggest things I looked for in those relationships was the simplicities of do they have the right attitude, effort, and coachability? And so it was important for me to be a part of this process to build relationships, but to make sure we had a well-defined, what are the right questions that we need to ask right away? Did we train in our case, district managers, regional managers, truly how to interview? I had so many
Ooh.
pitfalls on the interview process of halo and horn effects. If you said you were a Red Sox fan, I was hiring you. And it's so bad, obviously. And so, again, you talk about intentional and it starts. So, what does that look like? Are you involved? What are the questions that are really important? How do you truly quantify character? What are the
Mm.
things you do then inside an interview? We had a quote unquote character test. On the third interview, which I was part of, I would have my executive assistant or HR manager would actually greet the person this was a face to face. So whether it's virtual or not, you could figure out how you need to do it. And they would introduce themselves. They would not say their title, they would just introduce themselves. And they were looking for step one, were they on time? Step two, how did they get treated by the individual? And you would be amazed at some of the stories that would get to me on character right away. I think it started with me at that hiring process with really trying, I call it to match or hiring to match your culture, not just fit it. And to me, it might be semantics, but when you think of match or fit, fit is I have a size 8 foot and I just want a size 8. Match is the tie is going to complement the shirt and the shoes and the belt and everything. And I wanted
Mhm.
people to really have this diversity of thought, ethnicity, perspective that would make us better. So just that alone in the hiring was something we would be very mindful of are we asking, how do we ask clarifying questions?
Mhm.
Because sometimes someone is going to say something in an interview and they might not mean it. It just came across wrong, or what was said was not intended. And you're trying to put people at ease so they can be their best. And I always I wanted to get them to give me their typical response versus their optimal response. I
Mhm.
wanted them to be so comfortable that I really got what they were about in a short period of time.
Man, I'm just going to go ahead and declare this. Everyone listening, you're going to have to listen to this episode 2 or 3 times because of the depth of everything that he is talking about. Not only are we talking about workplace culture, we're talking about processes for training, we're talking about interviewing and hiring, we're talking about onboarding. There's so much here, Eric. I just can't thank you enough. In looking at everything that we've talked about of jump starting that workplace culture, the intentionality behind it. Another thing that we've got to talk about, we've talked about how to, establish that initiative. You had that great visual graphic of the hourglass. All of this also helps. employees avoid burnout? And we know that that is a huge issue. There seems to be no work boundaries anymore, right? We're answering email all the time. People are working longer hours, even though a lot of our work can now be automated, and now we have this great gift of AI coming into the workplace to help with that. But burnout's still an issue. So, how do certain businesses keep their employees engaged and avoid burnout through even those challenging times?
Yeah, well, it's funny. There's two terms. One's burnout and one's bore out. And I mentioned before, I have 11 nieces and nephews, three kids, and each have their circles of five. And I hear all the stories, but here is a simplified approach that the book will go in a little bit more detail. But for engagement and how to avoid burnout, we talked about the first one is what are you doing to create a strong relationship with your team? Number two is how do you clearly communicate your goals and expectations with your team? So important, especially on the bore out side, but certainly the burnout is I just don't even know what's expected of me. And so what are you doing there? Do you supply them the right material, equipment, and information in order to achieve the desired outcome? I hate to use this line because it could come across wrong, but the more I trained, the more comfortable I felt I could challenge. And
Mm.
so you have to have an environment that you're constantly supplying people with ways to be better. The fourth was just what are you doing to encourage personal and professional growth within your organization that helps avoid that burnout and bore out. And then the last is what do you do to recognize top performance? You always want, and I really say recognize performance, reward excellence. And I
Oh, can
think
you say that
those
again? That is so good.
recognize performance, but reward excellence.
Oh, that's good.
And those factors were actually written in our training wall. It was part of the review, it was part of the interview process. How have you demonstrated these factors? So, as you remember in the beginning from the Johnny the Bagger story, even for the five factors, it wasn't a secret for me. Gallup has told us and other companies engagement leads to great outcomes. Engagement avoids these burnouts or boreouts. So, why don't we want to be great at that? They gave us the answers to the test. So now we just build it out. And I think that was extremely helpful, but I can't reference or reiterate it enough. Your team has to truly believe and understand it. And so one
Mhm.
of our internal interview questions as these employees would go through the ranks was how have you demonstrated these engagement factors? It was really, really important that you would be able to explain that. It was also part of a review. So as you can see, everything is in alignment.
Oh, that's so good. And I just want to go back to the fact that you said that you stepped in at the third interview. So it wasn't just a 30-minute interview, welcome to the team. There's not a good way to flesh out character and those soft skills as well as the hard skills or anything else that you're looking for in a 30-minute interview. So I love that as well.
Yeah.
Eric, in thinking about all of this and putting it together in a package. How do some leaders continue to inspire that high performance while still, right? We know that leadership is such a complex dual thing. How do we inspire high performance while still optimizing those profits, growth, and retention?
Yeah, I would go back to really honing in on these specific factors that will build an ability to have, as we said, right material, equipment, and information to be able to have these high expectations. I always felt that if I was going to consistently teach and coach and each layer would do the same, then we were allowed to raise the standard, to raise the bar, to raise the expectations.
Mhm.
And so by doing that training, by being really clear of what we're trying to communicate with our goals and expectations, by doing all of those things, I personally felt it allowed us to now not feel overwhelmed. I'm not anxious. I know where I stand. I know how to do it. I'm empowered to do it. Good things are really going to happen. And that's, we were lucky. We were considered the many years the most profitable region in the country. And that's
Mhm.
hard to do. It's hard to be great in customer service, but to have it translate into the bottom line, really challenging. And so that allowed us to optimize and continue to raise this standard and create a culture of pride. If we did it right, the benefit wasn't for me. The
Mhm.
Stone family was going to be fine. It was watching the careers from day one to year six, watching them grow professionally, but even watching them personally and raising a family and doing all those things that they never thought they might be capable of doing. And then to get promoted within this environment, more belief, better behaviors, consistent experiences, all these great things that lead to special results.
Mhm.
And so that's how we did it.
I want to point out something based upon the work that you're doing. We know that I'll just kind of generalize it. There can be a staffing issue in so many industries. Education, healthcare, and it can be multiple industries are struggling to hire high quality people. And what you just said is you didn't lower your expectations. You actually raised them. You had
Yeah.
very high expectations, but with those high expectations, man, the support, the clarity, all of the scaffolding that you had to hold up those high expectations to allow people to be successful, that it actually retained employees and drew more employees to you. And that is such an important point. I hope everybody heard that through everything that he was saying. Whenever you come to a challenge, you have to look inward and say, what is it about my culture is making people want to run away? That's probably what's creating the staffing issue. Yes, there can be industry issues. Don't let me paint with a broad brush here, but you know, look internally and how can you make it the best experience for those? And people will stay in cultures that have high expectations and high support. I love that so much. And I have a little side note, Eric.
Yeah.
One of the best teachers I've ever hired actually was a manager at Enterprise. And I want to tell you a short little story. The reason she went into education, she had a special needs child. They were moving states, and she was so drawn heart wise to work in special education. So we hired her as a special education teacher. But she was a manager of an enterprise, and her leadership ability, capability, service, in special ed, we have something called IEP meetings,
Yeah.
where you sit with parents and you go through, legal and how to support the child best. And those can often be lengthy meetings. And her leadership from day one for every stakeholder, from the child to working with the team, collaboration to working with the parents, to then growing in leadership as a team lead. I just want to say, sir, kudos because everything you just talked about 100% transferred in that one employee into the education field. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll give you another quick little story is we talk about culture. And so I have three kids. My oldest would go trick-or-treating at our administrative building at the age of 5. He would join our summer picnic parties and he would be at our house when we would invite people over. And he grew within Enterprise. And the reason I share this story is he's a branch manager at Enterprise as well in my old territory. Why? Well, he was built within a culture that he saw his dad have a pretty good career and he wanted to be part of that. Now the true piece though is will they, as I always say, they just have to treat you right. And if they treat you right, you stay. And if they don't treat you right, then you have no obligations there. So the challenge for any organization, my sons or daughter, is are they going to treat them right? Are they going to make sure they feel special? Are they going to challenge them? But a little afterward in the book was he was brought within the culture. He works presently at the same company I did. So
That's amazing. And
yeah,
such a testimony to legacy. The
yeah,
legacy of just what you modeled as a parent and as a leader. And that's one of the things we talk about so much on this podcast. Leadership is not just a work thing. The most important organization you will ever lead is your family. And I
yeah.
just kudos to you, sir. Such a great testimony. So Eric, in thinking about workplace culture, what are some key takeaways our listeners need to apply to grow them in leadership?
I would say think of a simple approach like an hourglass that we talked about. I think will help them with an approach. And so when they're thinking of an initiative to build this high performance culture, kind of go through that hourglass methodology. And I'd really encourage them to do something with those 5 factors. One of my most popular talks I do internationally is on employee engagement in those 5 factors.
Mhm.
So I would say for sure to keep it simple, those two would be really important.
I love it. The hourglass, when thinking about initiatives, and the 5 factors of engagement. Such good stuff. And you may be saying, okay, what are the 5 factors of engagement? He did talk about it, so go back and listen to this, but
Yeah,
also read his book,
there you
Jumpstart Your
go.
Workplace Culture. All right. So, Eric, what is one poor decision you would warn our leaders to avoid? Like, come on, leaders, don't do this one thing. You're better than that.
Unfortunately, I think there's a few. I really do think there's this leadership gap out there that we must be better. I think a common one is I think at times leaders have the flavor of the week and it gets very confusing and muddled and it's not
Mm.
clearly communicated. And so one week it's all about the new technology and then they shift quickly to no, we got to really hone in on sales. And then it's all about compliance and it's quite confusing. And it really becomes, well, what are we doing? And the truth is we need to do them all. But you can't overmanage one of them. It's got to be this consistent flow as it goes through the hourglass. And so I think flavor of the week is something I hear quite often. And complexity, if I had to throw another, they tend to make it very complicated, don't really believe in addition by subtraction.
Oh, preach that. I had a whole episode where I just went on a rant and rave about how we just make things complex. Yes, so good. So, guys, leave the flavor of the week to your ice cream, not to your leadership. Love that so much. All right, Eric, where can the listeners go to learn more about you, your work, and where can they go get Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture?
Easiest is LinkedIn. I would say go to LinkedIn and you'll see me there. My daughter's actually got me to start Instagram on ClearPath Ventures underscore. I think those would be the two best ways. And of course, the good news is the book is at a bookstore near you and available Audible or at a bookstore. So.
Awesome. Great. I will have links in the show notes to those places, especially the new Instagram. Go check them out there as well. All
That's
right,
right.
Eric, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom, experience, your stories on workplace culture, which is one of the most important, essential areas, or I call them rocks of leadership. So thank you so much for your wisdom.
Bethany, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right, guys, until next time, continue putting in the work of building your life and leadership on the rocks, the essential rocks. God bless. Remember, the most essential rock you can build your life and leadership on is the rock of Jesus Christ. Today's Bible verse comes from Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Hey, it's Bethany again. If you're enjoying the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss a single episode. Also, be sure to rate the show. We hope to earn 5 stars in serving you in leadership, and through your ratings, it'll help us get the word out about what we do here at Leadership on the Rocks. If you feel this podcast is helpful, be sure to share it with your friends, family, and coworkers, or anyone who wants to grow in leadership, but also have harmony between their work and home life. Thanks, and I'll see you again in the next episode.